hi everybody. David Fogel with you, CEO of the Symphonina Foundation. We're here with another podcast, and I'm very pleased to have with us today composer and YouTube educator Zach Heyde. Zach has worked for projects for Dreamworks, for Disney, for Hallmark, for Pokemon, on Kung Fu Panda the Dragon Knight, which was on Netflix, and if I understand was an Emmy-winning score. Is that right, Zach?
That's right.
It's a lot of work, and you've been doing it for 20 years or so in orchestration. It's just a pleasure to meet up with you finally. I've been watching your YouTube videos for a long time, and it's great that we have an opportunity to get together. I do want to ask you first, I believe you're in the LA area, so let's ask how you're doing with all the fires that are going on in Los Angeles. I hope everything's okay for you.
Yeah, thank you, David. Yeah, it's been very grateful that I'm doing okay. My wife, we're both doing okay. We got some potential evacuation notices, but it never came to pass. So the fire's been away from us mostly. But obviously LA still needs a lot of help from people. So we're trying to do our part, and I'm trying to encourage people to donate when they can, because it's been pretty impactful here.
Yes, and I'm sure we both know many people who've lost everything or some things, and it has been a major tragedy, of course, but I'm glad to hear that you're doing well and your family's doing well. That's great. Let's go to how you started your music career. I think you grew up on the East Coast. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Born and raised in Connecticut, little small suburb. Not a super musical area, but I showed inclination into music when I was really young. The story I usually share with people is my parents said that they found me, like, they thought they had the TV on downstairs, and they went downstairs and saw that I was playing a toy xylophone, like playing the Flintstones theme. So they
well, that's not an easy one to start with. That's pretty good.
No. Apparently, I also was like color coding some sheet music with like the color of the xylophone notes, like trying to get it down. But I showed musical interest like at a very young age, and thankfully my parents were super supportive and encouraged that. So I was able to find a couple resources locally. I was performing at a composing contest that we did in my elementary school, which was super interesting that even existed. Mm-hmm. But it gave me an opportunity every year to kind of show up, write some music, perform the music. And then I went to college as well in Connecticut at the Hart School of Music, where I studied composition, and then eventually made my way to Tennessee, and then eventually all the way to LA, where I'm now doing composing work.
I see. So the LA was the call for the composing work. Did you have that work in Tennessee as well, or what did you find in Tennessee?
Yeah,
Nashville, I'm guessing, but I don't know.
Yeah, it was just outside Nashville. Yeah, it's interesting. My whole career has essentially been a remote one. Even in LA, what I've found is I've had opportunities to meet people in different areas, but ultimately all the work happens in my home studio, at least the work that I've done. So in a way, it's only these areas have been as useful as my ability to meet new people. And so I was doing composing work like for media at different scales, pretty much my whole career, like from 2014 when I was in college on. LA was nice has been nice because there's obviously a lot of people in the industry here, and it's been an opportunity to meet with those people. But what I usually do tell composers is that in my experience, it really has more to do with the level of proactivity you have and how you reach out with people, and also just the way that you enjoy connecting with new people. Because for me, a lot of these things happen over Zoom anyway. And I feel pretty confident that I could do this career from just about anywhere. I just really enjoy being in LA and what it has to offer.
So when you're reaching out to people, let's talk about that, because that is part of the business of being a professional composer. You have to get people that you want to compose things for or that they want you to compose things for. How do you go about mainly finding those people who would like to hire you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that the challenge that a lot of composers have, and I had this in the beginning too, is there's a real eagerness to want to find opportunities and to want to work with people. And what I found is that eagerness sometimes gets in the way of people being able to communicate more authentically. And I experienced this too in the beginning, where I was just dreaming of doing this for a living. And so my approach was kind of short-sighted in a lot of ways. I would find opportunities to reach out to people. I remember one that I did that was like particularly embarrassing was there was a composer whose work I really liked. And he had mentioned that he was sick and he was really bummed because he wasn't able to do a gig. And for some reason, my young brain took that as an opportunity to get in his DMs and tell him, if
Yeah.
you need help with your music, I'll help you out. So like I was a little callous with like the way I used to approach it. And in my experience, what I found is when I kind of loosened my grip a little bit, stopped focusing on trying to like get work and just started trying to connect with other creative people, that's when opportunities would occur more naturally. So for me, it started really just in a snowball effect with reaching out to some old people I knew in high school. There was one actor who happened to be in LA, just reached out to reconnect with him, said, "Hey, man, I don't know how to say this, but like I could really use your help. I don't know anybody. Is there any chance you know anybody who could help me?" I was honest for the first time. And that essentially led to one gig, which led to two, which led to four. And it wound up creating this big snowball effect where now I have people in my network that I can speak more honestly about and find work from them. But it starts with authenticity, I think, in my experience.
Yeah. When you're doing a job, is it just you, or do you have a team that works with you, or do you adversely like to work with a team of other people?
So I've done work on the opposite side of it. A lot of the work that I've done that's been more like close to AAA stuff and commercial has been me being part of a team, usually doing additional music. That's something I leaned into a lot when I was in LA for about 2.5 years. For my personal client stuff, I actually tend to really prefer more of the independent stuff. I find that honestly, I can charge more for a lot of that kind of work because there's less comparative standards in the independent work. So if you work with the right people, they can really value you in a unique way. I also just really like the creative briefs that come with independent work. So for that kind of work, it's been small enough where I haven't had to rely on a team, but I have worked in teams before, and they can be really enjoyable in many ways. You get opportunities to learn from each other as you work through those processes.
So it sounds like that when you're reaching out to people, you're reaching out basically for yourself, and that means it's limited, I guess, by the opportunities you have in terms of your own availability. You're working on a project. It's like this, every consultant has this problem, right? You win the job, whatever it is, then you have to do it, and when you're doing it, you're still having to reach out to find the next thing you're going to do by the time you finish the thing that you're doing.
Yes, it's a really interesting thing. I think I heard Ryan talking on the podcast, and he was speaking to stuff that I'm very familiar with. Most of the composers that I know in LA don't really do their career the way that I do it. Because ultimately there's a lot of challenges to composing careers or artistic careers in general. I mean, income is obviously a huge challenge. Managing workload is a huge challenge, potentially managing a team. And the question I think that people eventually have to ask themselves is like, where do I want to lean into? And do I even want to scale? And what does it look like to scale? Because I think if one is going to do composing primarily, where it's like, I want to only make money from my music, which is an interesting thing that I think there's a lot behind that too. But if somebody decides like the only thing I want to do is write music for the rest of my life, then you're essentially faced with this challenge of like, I either need to take on a ton of composing work in order to supplement my income in order to do this. Maybe I need to charge more. Maybe I need to take a bunch of composing work and charge more. And then eventually what tends to happen is people go, well, I just simply can't handle this workload. Or I really want to focus my efforts as a composer on a couple select things and then delegate the rest. And then that's when people tend to build out teams. But for me, because of what I'm interested in and what I value, I actually really prefer being able to take my time a little bit with composing stuff and being more selective. And so as a result, that inevitably made me decide to supplement my income in other ways, like doing YouTube, building up products and courses. I do mentorship as well. And that's sort of enabled me more selectivity with the kinds of projects, which ultimately has actually allowed me to take more creative risks and charge more for clients. Because if I needed the money to be able to do stuff, composers get caught in this situation where they have to say yes, and they don't have any leverage to be able to push themselves to raise their rates or take creative risks.
Yeah, I think too, if you get, I mean, everybody's different, so I should preface it by that, but it's been my experience, at least, and people I've known, when you take on something and you say, I'm only going to do X to make money, then it becomes a lot less fun
Yeah. Yeah,
Becomes a
that's
lot
well
less
said.
fun. So like when I was much younger, I was very interested in being a pilot. I was accepted to the Air Force Academy when I got out of high school and didn't go because there are too many rules in the Air Force for me. But I did get a private pilot's license, instrument rating, and commercial thing, and then I hung it up. But it's a difference between I want to go flying, I want to
Yeah.
play music today, I want to compose something today, versus I have to do it today, and I have to take these people to Detroit. And then,
Yes.
if you don't want to go to Detroit, that's less fun. So then all of a sudden, the less fun part starts to become the primary thing, and that's
Yeah.
really bad in a creative situation.
It's such an interesting it's a very recent process for me, honestly, so I'm still like navigating this, but essentially what happened to me was I was not really involved in the commercial industry, like the more AAA stuff where there's large teams and things like that. So I was very new to that. Prior to that, a lot of the work that I was doing is really similar to actually kind of the balance that I have now. But when I moved to LA, what had happened naturally, because I was reaching out to people here, was I was introduced into this space. And you're totally right. I mean, the dynamic that I noticed was like more is better. And it was always a question of trying to solve that problem of more. And the way people are solving that inevitably is like teams, working through teams. Or sometimes there's that efficiency problem of like, I need to get faster with my art. And those are totally valid and really, really useful. But what I began to feel was like part of the reason I engaged in my art and what I love about music in the first place was control, actually, creative control and a sense of challenge. And when you get good at something in an industry, it becomes sort of your calling card. And for me, I was known for doing like orchestral stuff, really big. I could write really fast. And so I started to get hired primarily for that kind of work. And that's helpful. I was able to supplement income. I was able to exclusively make money as a composer like full time in 2022. But I just found I was losing a lot of the creative spark personally. And I also, this is just a personal thing, but I really enjoy the collaborative process of working directly with a client. I really, really like having a conversation with the director and asking them questions and challenging them on their visions and just working through that. I wasn't getting that when I was part of a team because I was displaced in a lot of ways from the clients I was working with. So I didn't know that about myself. It revealed gradually over time, and eventually hit this point where I'm like, this doesn't make sense because I'm writing music all the time, but I'm not feeling creatively fulfilled. That is strange to me. It was quite a trust fall for me to start saying no to things that I'd sort of like built my way up to be able to saying yes to.
Right.
But the long term effect that I've had so far over the last year that this has happened is I've been able to re-engage with my art in a what feels like a really healthy, inspired way. And I really do think that choosing a path where you can engage with your art in the best way possible has some of the best long-term results. Like it may not look exactly like what somebody thinks it might look like for their career, but what I've found is as I've been able to make art for me again and engage with that practice, it just shows in like every part of how I show up with people. It shows with when I'm talking to potential clients. It shows with how I show up publicly on like YouTube. And it has a really positive trickle down effect where me feeling really abundant from my creative process is leading to much better opportunities than I was having before when I was feeling just desperate to get that next gig.
Yeah. So let's talk about what you are working on right now, which I believe is
Sure.
called The Raven's Hollow. That's your own project. So
Yep.
let's
That
talk
was,
about the inspiration for that and hear
yeah.
where you are on it and when we can all expect it.
Yeah, so that basically was the project that was inspired in the space when I started saying no to stuff. I pretty much formally left additional music in May of last year. And when I did that, a ton of free time opened up, which was cool at first and then difficult to navigate. And so it's like, well, what do I do with this? And eventually, it had been about 4 years since I'd written a personal album. And when I'd written my previous album, which was Frostfell, I was not really involved in the commercial space at all. So I'd grown a lot as a composer in terms of my production, how I thought about music since that time. And so it felt like this is a great opportunity to kind of re-engage with my art. So to figure out what I was going to actually make, I actually went back to thinking about my childhood before I was really pushing myself as a career composer, and like, what did I even consume as an artist? What did I do? How did I spend my time? What was I listening to? And the answer was a lot of like dark fantasy stuff. I've always been really into dystopian things like 1984 and The Matrix
Okay.
and
All right.
gothic stuff. So I basically like tried to make an album that I'd feel comfortable sitting in the world in, and it inspired a lot of change in my life too. The setup I have behind me, which is like kind of, Victorian was inspired by that process. I bought a cheap Amazon robe and sit in my armchair and read books now. So, I just try and like immerse myself.
Living the dream,
feeling.
Zach. That's it.
That's right. Exactly. My $20 robe. The things that basically make me feel like I'm in that world, and then I just tried to let whatever came out. So what's evolved has been kind of a story about a boy a Pinocchio-like character who is trying to figure out the source of his origin, where he comes from, why he exists in the first place. And a story has evolved naturally as I've written the music, which I've been actually writing out as well. But it's been a really, really satisfying creative process. I'm really happy with the music, and I'm hoping to have it out sometime in March if all goes well of this year.
Okay, right around the corner. So you're going to release it all at once, or are we going to see some singles coming off? How long is the project? Is it a full-length album, or what should we expect?
It's probably going to be about 30 to 40 minutes. So I don't know if that's considered full length or not.
Yeah, I'd say that's full length. That's fine.
Yeah, it was going to be longer, but I've been really like cautious about making sure I don't just add fluff to it. I really like concise storytelling, and I try to do that in the music too. But you can see previews of it on YouTube. I've been trying to share pieces of my process on YouTube because I think a lot of people share what happens after creativity's done, but I've always really enjoyed sharing kind of the messy underbelly of what it looks like when you're trying to figure something out.
Yes, the blooper reel in real time, right? I mean,
yeah, that's right.
That's the whole thing of the creative process. You mentioned YouTube, so let's talk about. Well, good luck with everything on that too.
Thank you.
I and everybody else will be looking forward to it, and we'll follow along. We'll have you back on after it's released and follow up with it. But in terms of your YouTube channel, I did look this morning and I saw you were at 99.7 thousand. You're just almost at 100,000. So congratulations in advance. I'm sure you'll go over it. Maybe not as a result of this podcast, but we shall see. So what was your inspiration for saying, you know what, I'm going to educate the world, along with some other people that we've mentioned? Ryan Leach, you mentioned on a previous podcast, and Christopher Siu, and a bunch of other people who you all do a great job of doing orchestral or education on YouTube, all free. It's awesome.
Yep.
And you have Patreon things that people want to participate in. But let's go back to what your inspiration was to become a YouTube educator.
Yeah. So I have to credit my dad for the very, very beginning of this. He basically created a YouTube channel for me when I was super young because I was doing piano mostly. I didn't know that I was interested in composing at that time. I was just performing piano and taking lessons. And he basically just created a channel, I think way back in 2006, like right when YouTube started, just to share like my covers with family members. So it was completely intended to be that. What he didn't expect was one of the covers that I did happened to actually do really well. I think back then it hit like 100,000 views, which was crazy. And so there was this kind of natural calling to say like, hey, there's a benefit to sharing your work with people. And at that time too, YouTube was, it was the Wild West. Like you could see anything and everything, and nothing had been done before. So there's a lot of incentive to just like keep trying things. So that was kind of the genesis of the channel. He pretty quickly just was like, hey, this is yours. Like, do what you want with it. And so I didn't really have a game plan or anything. All I was using it for in the beginning was just a documentation of like what I was up to for people that I knew. So I was sharing piano covers that I finished. Like, hey, when my piece is done, when I've learned the piece, putting it on YouTube feels like it's like the period mark where it's like, now I'm done. Now I can move on. And I just treated my relationship with YouTube that way for years. Um, Eventually, I wound up making a second channel with a friend of mine from college where we did piano duets. It's called Frank and Zach Piano Duets. And that channel did really well, actually. Like, had a large period of growth. We were doing classical arrangements, film, video game music and stuff, but we would dress in like wacky costumes that would be in the style of the game just for fun. That did well. And so it was enjoyable process as a performer, but eventually I had a point where I was like craving to have my music itself be heard. And so I made a shift to go from piano stuff to composing stuff. And that's kind of when the educational side of my channel started. So I was sharing basically my process, not even intending to attract an audience of composers. In fact, I really was hoping to attract clients.
Right.
The natural extension.
Well, I'm sure you do, though, but
it does. Yes,
yeah.
very much. It does help in the long term. I found that too. But there was this unintentional thing that was happening of like a lot of composers were getting interested in my stuff, and so it sort of became this echo chamber in a way where it was like, okay, well, people are interested in this. Let me talk more about this. What I didn't intend at all was how useful it was going to be for my career, actually, because for most of the career, I just saw YouTube as this little like side gig thing that I did. I had completely segmented it from my career goals. And so like it was almost annoying, to be honest. I would go to LA and, talk to someone and they'd be like, "Oh yeah, I've seen your YouTube." And I was like, "Oh man, like that's the thing over in the corner. I don't want to talk about that. Like I want to talk about my real career." But when I decided to start embracing it as this thing that was offering me leverage and fulfillment, that's actually the thing that enabled my career to grow a lot more rapidly. And now I'm in a phase where I'm really embracing it, and I'm leaning even harder into what feels like engaging in YouTube in an authentic way for me now, and just continuing to bank on that because it's been such a fruitful part of my career and something that's really fulfilling for me too, that I think is ultimately probably going to last longer than my music is hopefully the impact that I'm having by sharing my process with people.
Well, may they both last, but I agree with you.
That'd be nice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure it must be very gratifying to get fan mail, and I'm sure you get a lot of it.
Oh yeah.
You do a great job. One of the things I noticed is they use the breath controller when you're doing your compositions, especially, for the wind section. And for those who do get the video of this podcast eventually, you guys know I'm a sax player, so I appreciate that because it's quite easy to write long melody lines where the wind player never gets to breathe. But
yep.
What is your experience using that breath controller? Is it something that you would recommend other people try, or is it kind of something that's a nuanced thing? It's kind of more your thing.
It's hard to know whether other people will gravitate towards it. I can speak for myself. I was initially intrigued in it. The Skyrim composer I had seen once using a breath controller on some video, and I didn't even know it existed, honestly. And I was like, that seems really interesting because I've always, my backstory is I was a pianist first and foremost. So my engagement with composition that feels most natural is performative. Whereas I know for some other people who maybe like start in notation, their experience, they have the opposite as me. They're like, I don't understand how to write in a DAW because like I need to see all the notes. I need to construct it. I think it's totally valid. For me, I'm a performer. So my engagement with my art is performative. And so when I saw that there was a tool to program modulation where all I have to do is breathe a line, I was very intrigued. And for me, it's been a total game changer. It just has enabled me to perform MIDI, which I've always wanted to do. And so my setup looks ridiculous now where I basically I perform modulation with the breath. I have one hand on a fader that's controlling vibrato and expression, and then I use my right hand to play in the lines. And it's very natural for me now, but it was essentially like learning a new instrument to perform these different things. But now that I have it, it makes composing feel very effortless for me in terms of programming lines.
How long did it take you to feel like, you're an accomplished musician with that instrument, let's say, whatever we want to call that instrument?
Yeah, I probably about half a year, I would say. Like in terms of not just knowing how to perform it, but also the other side of it is like knowing how your VSTs specifically respond to it.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely right. Yeah.
yeah, you have to know those things. I mean, it literally is your instrument. And so like I know, for example, that um, Cinemax Studio winds and strings play really nice with the breath controller, but the brass has like, which I still love, but I know that the brass like at the top end opens up. It goes from being like really soft and mellow brass to just like super like, Hans Zimmer punchy brass. And so I tend to not use the breath controller as aggressively with it. I'll tend to like ride expression to compensate for the volume. But that's like a super specific thing that I know just from the experience of doing it. So the recommendation I always give to people is like, I mean, it goes without saying, but the best way to practice this stuff is actually just to like write music as opposed to trying to do things in isolation. It's so much better just to engage with your art and figure out what roadblocks are coming up that are getting in the way of you getting your ideas out smoothly.
And then maybe like reference tracks for things that you want, that you admire as
That's
performances,
right.
so that you can see what you're getting and where the differences are for what you're performing and
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
they're getting.
For media composers, I think mock-ups, like making mock-ups is not a separate practice than engaging in composing. It's really like they're one and the same because ultimately what composers in media are delivering is usually just whatever comes out of your DAW, like the sound, minus a couple, if you get a mixer or something like that. So I see it as all one and the same: production, realistic mock-ups, mixing and mastering, arranging, composing. It's all part of the same process. And so I think it's useful to try and practice them all kind of in tandem with each other. And so, yeah, making mock-ups of music you love is such a great way to get in the underbelly of what you like and all the reasons why you like it, what you can kind of gain from it.
I have to ask then, have you played any wind instruments?
Just a spirit flute, which probably doesn't count.
All right, no, that doesn't count. All right. If I were to make a resolution for you for 2025, that would be one. Blow
Oh,
into
I'd love that.
blow into something, and let's see how it goes. So when you finish Raven's Hollow, which is going to finish release, you said in March, do you have something on the calendar for the rest of the year, or are you an open book at this point?
This is the first year where I've tried to just be a bit more zen with the whole thing. Usually I create a big annual plan and have a whole, attack strategy for how I'm going to do stuff. But I'm trying to just be a little looser this year and see what comes up. I have some ideas on what I want to do with the album. A dream project of mine is to be the head of department for some kind of an indie video game that's like dark fantasy. So in the back of my head, I'm definitely thinking like, hey, if this album were to get in front of the right people, that would be amazing. But ultimately, I'm just trying to see what is presented to me this year and be more reactive towards that, because I'm finding that this approach is, it's a little bit more realistic than trying to push up against a wall. But it's also letting me be more responsive towards opportunities. So nothing super crazy planned beyond finishing my album, writing more music this year. And then I've also been running like a private mentorship group for composers who are a couple stages back from where I am. And that's been extremely gratifying as well.
Probably educational for you too. I think I've always found when teaching other people things, no matter what it is, you always get the nuances better yourself, and it opens up maybe other ideas for you. I suppose it's probably the same for you.
Yes, very much so. I think ultimately, like the whole desire for a lot of composers to get into the industry is just to be able to be around other creative people. And I think if you can find ways to do that prior to you breaking in, whatever that means, breaking in, whether it's like just creating a circle of people around you who you trust that are also creative, or something in an academic format, whether it's mentorship or college or courses, I think it's immensely beneficial because you get the sounding board for your ideas. People can kind of keep you supported when inevitably things will get tough or confusing in the creative journey. It's just, there's so many benefits. And I've found the same thing by engaging with, the students in this group is like, it's massively impactful just being able to show up every week and talk to each other and see what's up and what people are planning and thinking about.
Sounds great. So if people do want to get in touch with you, Zach, what's the best way to do so?
So I have a contact page right on my website. You can just go straight there, and then it's got a couple options depending on if you want, to work with me as a composer, or if you want to work with me as an educator, or if you want to buy a course or product of mine. That's usually the easiest way to do it.
So just for the record, ZACHHEYDE.com, if I remember off the top of my head. There we go.
Yep.
All right, Zach, it's been a pleasure. We're going to listen to some more of your great music on the way out here, and we'll look forward to Call of the Ravens Hollow coming up shortly, and then we'll be back with you later in the year to see how you're doing.
Sounds awesome, David. Thank you. This is a pleasure.
My pleasure. Thank you.